So today I want to explain something that is being massively misrepresented in almost every piece of mainstream economic coverage: the trade war between the United States and China. Because what you are being told about the trade war is this: it is a geopolitical competition between two superpowers over economic dominance. It is about semiconductors and military technology and strategic industries. It is about who controls the supply chains and technologies of the future. And all of that is true. But what you are not being told, what the coverage almost never explains clearly, is the mechanism by which all of that geopolitical competition reaches into your wallet and takes your money directly and immediately. Not through some distant future consequence, right now, this year, on your grocery receipt, on your electronics purchase, on your clothing bill, on the cost of every manufactured good you buy. And I want to explain that mechanism precisely today because understanding it changes how you interpret every piece of news about tariffs, trade policy, and economic competition that you will encounter for the rest of your life. Let me start with the most fundamental economic truth about tariffs that almost nobody states plainly. A tariff is a tax. That is all it is. It is a tax on imported goods collected at the border, paid by the importer, and passed through to the consumer in higher prices. When the United States government imposes a 25% tariff on Chinese goods, American companies importing those goods pay 25% more to bring them into the country. And because those companies are not charities, they pass that cost to their customers, to you, the consumer. This is not a controversial economic claim. It is the basic mechanics of how tariffs work. The tax incidence, the question of who ultimately bears the cost of a tariff, falls overwhelmingly on the importing nation's consumers, not on the exporting nation. China does not pay American tariffs. American consumers pay American tariffs. The framing of tariffs as a punishment imposed on foreign nations is one of the most persistent and consequential economic misrepresentations in modern political discourse. And if you are finding this analysis useful, please subscribe. I cover these economic mechanisms every week because the gap between how trade policy is presented to people and how it actually affects their lives is one of the most consequential information gaps in public discourse. Now let me walk you through the specific mechanism by which the current trade war is reaching into household budgets across America and through second-order effects across the global economy. The United States currently has tariffs of 25% or more on approximately $300 billion worth of Chinese goods across hundreds of product categories. These tariffs cover electronics components, consumer electronics, clothing and textiles, furniture, steel, aluminum, solar panels, batteries, and a vast range of intermediate manufactured goods that feed into American industrial production. Each of those tariffs raises the cost of the targeted goods by the tariff percentage, and those cost increases do not stay contained within the categories directly targeted. They propagate through supply chains in ways that multiply the initial price impact. Here is the multiplication mechanism. When the cost of a Chinese-made component increases by 25% because of a tariff, the American manufacturer using that component faces a choice. They can absorb the cost increase and accept lower margins, or they can raise the price of their finished product to recover the cost. Most manufacturers do a combination of both, but over time, the price increase propagates forward through the supply chain toward the final consumer. And because modern supply chains are extraordinarily complex, with components crossing borders multiple times before reaching a finished product, tariffs on intermediate goods can be multiplied rather than simply added as they move through the production process. A 25% tariff on a Chinese component that represents 30% of a product's manufacturing cost does not produce a 7.5% price increase in the final product. It produces price pressures at every stage of the supply chain that can accumulate to significantly higher final price increases. The second mechanism is supply chain disruption cost. When tariffs make it economically unviable to source from China, manufacturers scramble to find alternative suppliers. Vietnam, Mexico, India, Bangladesh, and other lower-cost manufacturing locations have absorbed significant production that left China. But this relocation process is not free, and it is not instantaneous. Building new supplier relationships takes time. Qualifying new production facilities to meet quality standards requires investment and testing cycles that can take months to years. Training new workforces in specialized manufacturing processes requires sustained effort. Establishing new logistics networks, the warehousing, the freight contracts, the customs procedures, all of it takes time and money. And critically, the new suppliers are often less efficient than the Chinese suppliers they replace, at least initially, because the Chinese manufacturing ecosystem has decades of specialized learning embedded in it that cannot be replicated overnight by a Vietnamese or Mexican factory that is new to the product category. During the transition period, and supply chain transitions of this scale take 3 to 5 years to complete even under optimal conditions, manufacturing costs are structurally higher than they would have been under the previous supply chain architecture. Those higher costs flow through to consumer prices. The tariff itself is only the first wave of the price impact. The supply chain disruption cost is the second wave, and in many cases it is larger and longer lasting than the tariff itself. When analysts estimate the total cost to American consumers of the trade war, they typically capture the tariff revenue. They rarely fully capture the supply chain disruption cost. The true consumer price impact is substantially larger than the headline tariff figures suggest. If you have not subscribed yet, please do that now. The supply chain and trade dynamics I am describing connect directly to the inflation you are experiencing in your household budget right now, right? The third mechanism is the retaliation cycle. Trade wars are not one-sided affairs. When the United States imposes tariffs on Chinese goods, China retaliates with tariffs on American goods. Chinese tariffs on American agricultural exports have directly damaged American farmers who sell soybeans, pork, and other commodities to Chinese buyers. When those exports become more expensive in the Chinese market, Chinese buyers switch to Brazilian or Argentine or Australian suppliers. American farmers lose market share. Farm income falls. The agricultural communities that depend on those farm incomes contract. This is not a hypothetical. It is what happened in the 2018 to 2019 trade war escalation. American soybean exports to China fell by billions of dollars in a single year. Brazil became the dominant supplier of soybeans to China, a market position it has largely maintained even as trade tensions fluctuated. Once trade flows are redirected, they do not automatically return when tariffs are reduced. The commercial relationships, the logistics infrastructure, the trust between buyers and sellers, all of it has to be rebuilt. The economic damage from trade war retaliation is structural and persistent rather than temporary and reversible. The fourth mechanism is the winners and losers geography. And this is the part of the trade war story that most coverage almost entirely ignores. The United States-China trade war did not reduce global trade. It redirected it. The manufacturing that left China for cost or tariff reasons did not disappear. It moved, and the nations that captured that redirected investment have experienced significant economic benefits. Vietnam has become a major electronics and apparel manufacturer in the years since the trade war escalated. Its exports to the United States grew dramatically as Chinese exports fell. Mexico has absorbed a significant portion of the nearshoring investment that American companies are making to reduce their exposure to China and to take advantage of the United States-Mexico-Canada trade agreement. India has captured investment in electronics assembly, particularly in the smartphone sector. These nations are the structural winners of the current trade war era. Vietnam's GDP growth has been among the highest in Asia over the past several years, driven significantly by its emergence as a manufacturing alternative to China. Mexico's exports to the United States have grown substantially as American companies invest in nearshore manufacturing capacity. India's electronics assembly sector has attracted billions of dollars in investment from Apple, Samsung, and other major manufacturers seeking geographic diversification. The structural losers are more numerous. China's manufacturing export share has been declining at the margin. Nations that compete with Chinese goods in global markets face indirect pressure as Chinese manufacturers, seeking to compensate for lost American market share, export more aggressively to other markets and drive down prices that other competing manufacturers cannot match. Ordinary consumers in America and in other high-tariff nations are paying higher prices for manufactured goods. The production of those goods is shifting geographically in ways that will shape economic development trajectories for the next 2 to 3 decades. The trade war is not destroying global manufacturing. It is reorganizing where global manufacturing happens and who benefits from it. And the reorganization is neither orderly nor free. It is expensive, disruptive, and ongoing. The fifth mechanism is the fiscal cost that most analyses completely ignore. When tariffs are collected, the revenue goes to the American government. The Trump administration's tariffs collected tens of billions of dollars in revenue annually. That revenue sounds beneficial for the government's fiscal position. But it is important to remember that every dollar of that tariff revenue was a dollar taken from American consumers and businesses that paid higher prices for imported goods. The tariff revenue is not free money. It is a transfer from American consumers to the American government. And whether that transfer is welfare improving depends entirely on whether the government spends that money more productively than the consumers and businesses who paid it would have. The evidence from the first trade war period suggests that a significant portion of the tariff revenue was used to fund subsidy payments to American farmers whose export markets were damaged by Chinese retaliation. The government collected a tax from American consumers buying imported goods and used it to pay farmers who lost sales because of Chinese retaliatory tariffs. The net economic effect is a redistribution within the American economy that leaves most households worse off while protecting specific politically important constituencies. The world you are living in right now is one where the cost of the geopolitical competition between America and China is being paid in your daily budget through higher prices for electronics, clothing, furniture, and hundreds of other manufactured goods. The politicians who impose tariffs describe them as tough measures that punish foreign competitors and protect American workers and industries. The economic reality is that you are paying for them at the cash register every time you buy a product that was made using supply chains that cross the Pacific. And as the trade war escalates, as more goods face higher tariffs, as supply chains continue their expensive and disruptive reorganization over a transition period that will last years, the gap between what politicians say tariffs cost and what they actually cost ordinary households will continue to widen. The deep irony of the trade war narrative is that the people it is most supposed to benefit, American manufacturing workers who would gain jobs from reshored production, are also the people paying higher prices for every manufactured good they buy during the decade-long supply chain transition. The consumers and workers are frequently the same people, and the evidence suggests that the higher prices they pay as consumers outweigh the employment gains they see as workers, at least in the short and medium term. Subscribe for more analysis of how these trade policy decisions affect your daily financial life, explained clearly and plainly. And tell me in the comments, do you think this trade war is worth the cost you are paying as a consumer? See you next time.